we're looking at Luke chapter 18, verses 15 to 17. And in this passage, Luke recounts for us a very simple interchange between Jesus and his disciples and some parents, really, who are bringing children, even babies, to Jesus because they know that Jesus is a great man, but they want him to bless their children. And the disciples and the people surrounding Jesus are yelling at the parents, right? They're rebuking them, saying, don't bother Jesus, keep your children away. And Jesus says, don't stop the little children from coming to me, for such is the kingdom of heaven. Like, you have to be willing to enter God's kingdom as a child. That this is the teaching that Jesus gives. It's simple and it's straightforward. But what we see again and again in Luke chapter 18, there's a few themes that come out again and again. And one of them that comes out is really highlighted in this story. But we see over and over again that there's this sort of relationship that God wants to have with us where we come to him acknowledging our own powerlessness. In the first story that we looked at in the Sunday Connection, the widow, she would have been powerless against a judge. She would have been powerless within the society, not only as a woman, but as a woman without a husband, maybe with children, probably not much money to speak of. There was the tax collector who was powerless in a different way, not powerless because he lacked wealth or authority, but powerless because he was a sinner. Of course, there's children, and we've recognized the powerlessness of children within that culture. And later on in Luke chapter 18, we'll see a blind man who was powerless because of his physical health. Again and again, we see these sort of pictures of people who in different ways are powerless. And yet this is the demonstration that Jesus has for the way that we need to approach God in relationship to him, that we come recognizing our own powerlessness. That's what Jesus is saying. The only way to enter into God's kingdom, right? Yesterday we talked about the Pharisee, that the biggest problem with his prayer, with his heart attitude, with the way he approached God, was that he couldn't recognize his own powerlessness to have any right to be there. And Jesus essentially says the same thing in this passage, that the only way that we can enter God's kingdom, the only way we can be a follower of Jesus, is if we come as a child, recognizing our own powerlessness and our complete and total dependence on God. Now, I think it's helpful because Dr. Luke, he's obviously writing this account for his friend Theophilus, who he wants him to understand this is what it means. For some of you, you're a bit like Theophilus. Perhaps you've come across this devotion or someone has shared it with you, and you're exploring what does it mean to follow Jesus. And Jesus is reminding us that the only way we can come into a relationship with him is if we approach that relationship recognizing we need him. We have a dependence on him. We can't actually do it ourselves. And Dr. Luke is also building a narrative, right? That this story is building to the climax where we discover together the reason that Jesus came, the purpose that he came to fulfill, the reason why we can have total dependence on him for our life and our salvation. So my challenge or my question for you to consider today is, where do you need to acknowledge your dependence and your need for God? Where do you need to acknowledge in your own life? Perhaps you've never acknowledged it, and for the first time you need to admit, I need God. I cannot do this on my own. Or perhaps you've just been following God for a long time, but you've started to live as if you don't need him, as if you could do it yourself. And perhaps today you need to be reminded that just like a child, we all are dependent on our Father.